Welcome back to part 2 of my TBR shelf, where I take you on a brief tour of the books that I am planning to read this year. The synopsis is that I have a lot of physical TBRs that I am trying to get through over the next year, rather than picking up books at my library or secondhand bookshop. Not that I discourage that, but I am trying to make use of my personal library and ensure that the books I own are books that I personally enjoy and would recommend to other people. Part 1, I covered some of the fiction, specifically in the fantasy and mystery genres that I anticipate reading this year. Today we're going to go over some of the nonfiction books that I have. This is going to be a shorter pile just because I anticipate these books taking me a little bit longer to get through. I'm also not sure how well they will translate to the style of reviews that I've been doing, just because I don't know how easily it will be to translate something that may not be story and narrative driven into a review format. I have a bit of an eclectic mix of nonfiction to go through today. There may be a few more as I talk through these that I add to the pile, but we'll just start with what's on top, and that is To End All Wars. I have seen the movie version of this. I think it is a must-see and potentially must-read from everything that I know about this man and about this book and this story. This is the true story of Ernest Gordon, who served in the US military in World War II, and his experience of being captured and being a prisoner of war by the Japanese during that conflict. It is a very harrowing movie, and I am curious to see what my experience will be reading the book. I definitely anticipate there will be tears shed at this one. It seems like it'll be a pretty quick read, and I think this is one of those books that will be easier to do a video on, to be able to share the story if you're not already familiar with To End All Wars. Next up, I have Dearest Friend, which is a biography of Abigail Adams. I own the David McCullough John Adams biography. It was the first David McCullough book I ever read, and I fell in love with his style of biography writing. This is not by that same author, but when I saw it was about Abigail Adams, I've always been interested in her side of this story. She's one of those people who I think is raised as kind of an early feminist. There's conflicting viewpoints on that, for sure, but there's a famous letter of hers where she is urging John Adams and Congress, the first Congress, to not forget about the women when they are drafting the Constitution and trying to figure out what rights citizens have in the country and who are considered citizens of America and this new nation. So I'm very curious to dig into this, to actually read more about her life and about some of her writings and her thought processes in a time in which women didn't have a voice and didn't have much say in society outside of their own households. The third book that I want to read is Brother to a Dragonfly. This is one I know absolutely nothing about. It is one of those books where I got it from someone else who was trying to rehome books. Saw the title, thought it was very interesting. The synopsis talks about it being the story of two brothers growing up in the Deep South during the Depression. It is a true story, and it follows these brothers through serving in the Second World War, their marriages, their careers, and then one brother, I think, unaliving himself, and following the second brother, working through that from someone who was your closest friend, who you thought was happy and fulfilled in his life, all of a sudden choosing something that you could never imagine. And what does that mean for you? How do you grieve through that and kind of carry on without that person being with you anymore? I am intrigued by this. I don't know this author. I don't know anything more beyond what I just read you, but I think this should be an interesting book to read, and probably another one where I will cry at some point. And you may or may not see that on camera. I didn't intentionally mean for a lot of these books to fall around World War II. That just happens to be a lot of what I have on my shelf. I'm not one of those people who's all like, what's your favorite time period in history? World War II. I just apparently have amassed a lot of nonfiction within that era. I'm also realizing a lot of these are from the US perspective. I do have like a German perspective, so I may pull out some of those to read this year as well, to get like both sides of that conflict. Anyway, I have 11 Days in December, which follows Christmas at the Bulge, 1944. So smack dab in the middle of World War II. I had a brief interruption, so I'm not exactly sure where I ended off talking to you guys about this book. I think I probably just got to the title. I'm anticipating this one will be interesting because it is a very short period of time, a very concentrated period of time during World War II. So that should be interesting to read. That's all I have to say on this one. The last book that I have picked out for now is Shadows at Dawn by Carl Jacobi. It is a groundbreaking exploration of one of the worst Indian massacres in American history, illuminating the clash of American, Mexican, and tribal cultures in the southwestern borderlands. This is a time period of American history that I am not very familiar with. Honestly, was pretty glossed over in my curriculum growing up, and I know there are a ton of atrocities that white people and the American government perpetrated during the migration of settlers in the country, and how that displaced Native peoples. And just like the treatment of Native peoples has been horrendous throughout our history. So I am very interested to read this one and learn more about that and kind of fill in the gaps for myself about a history and peoples that are overshadowed and just kind of cast aside in our society today. My total book count for the year is around 45-50 books. If you've noticed between these two videos, I don't have near that many as my TBRs. Not to say I anticipate doing all 45 books just brand new, but I did pick out a couple more nonfiction books to add to the list just to bulk it up for myself. One of them is another World War II era book. This one from the Nazi Germany perspective. Not really perspective, but it happens within Nazi Germany. It is about an heiress who joins the OSS, and she's captured behind enemy lines in Germany, and so she becomes the first American woman in uniform taken prisoner on the Western Front, and we follow her and her escape from Nazi Germany. I think this is going to be really fascinating to see a woman's perspective, and it's a story that I know absolutely nothing about. So I'm very much looking forward to Guest of the Third Reich. Last but not least, we are switching genres. We are doing something completely unrelated to World War II and biographies, and that is Tomorrow's Table. This was published in 2008, so I anticipate at least a portion of the information presented in this book is probably outdated. It talks about like food science and food development. As you see on the front, right, it's organic farming, it's genetics, the future of food, so things like GMOs, and how we have genetically engineered food over time. It is written by two scientists, and so I anticipate this is going to be a fairly research-heavy book to read. Some of the topics it's going to talk through are like the tools of organic farming, Legislating lunch. Is GE food risky to eat? Conserving wildlands. Who owns the seeds? Who owns the genes? Deconstructing dinner. Genetically engineered, genetically grown. So it should be pretty interesting to read through this. I think this is definitely going to be one of those nonfiction books where I read a chapter at a time, because they're probably going to be really dense and also feel like fairly standalone topics. I'm going to end the video here for now. There may be some point in which I add a few more books. Honestly, it's just going to depend on how quickly I can actually get through a lot of my TBRs. At the time of recording, we are 3 months into 2026, and I've read probably half a dozen new books from my shelves. I haven't recorded all of them. Some of them were just like really quick reads that just honestly weren't very interesting to talk about. But that being said, I do have to pick up the pace if I anticipate getting through the 7 books I just showed you today, and the other 8, 9, 10, however many fiction I showed on the last time. And so I won't waste any more of your time talking about them. I will just start reading them and let you know what I think. Thanks for watching today, and I will see you on the next one.